The tank medium gun FV221, otherwise known as Caernarvon, appeared in the early 1950s and was a mating of an FV200 series chassis and the turret of an Mark III Centurion. It was designed as an interim vehicle to fill the gap while Britain's first heavy gun tank, the FV214 Conqueror, was in the final stages of development. Decades later, in 2018, and despite the real FV221 Caernarvon already being present, the popular online game World of Tanks, published and developed by Wargaming, was looking for a new premium tank to add to the British tech tree. The result was a ghastly blend of 4 separate parts. A small history is provided for this vehicle by Wargaming. A further development of the vehicles designed by the English electric company under the Universal Tank. The Caernarvon Action X is portrayed as a variant of the real FV221 Caernarvon, which is in turn part of the FV200 series of vehicles. Despite not being given its fighting vehicle number, this fake is presented as a vehicle of the FV200 series produced in the early 1950s, in the early years of the Cold War. The FV200 dates back to the final stages of the Second World War, when the British War Office was looking for a universal tank. The ancestor of today's main battle tanks, the idea of the universal tank was that one chassis would spawn many variants, thus reducing costs, development, and making maintenance and supply far easier. The first in the series was the FV201. Despite the long development period, the FV201 project was cancelled in 1949, with development moving on to the FV214 Conqueror and, in turn, the FV221 Caernarvon. As such, only 4 vehicles of the FV200 series were ever produced and entered into service. These were the FV214 and FV221 gun tanks, and the FV219 and FV222 Conqueror armored recovery vehicles. In 1950, the gun and turret of the FV214 Conqueror was still in the development phase. The hull and chassis, however, were already in the final stages of development. The chassis was a simplified version of the FV201 series. The main simplification was in the engine bay, where the power takeoff for the additional devices that the FV200 series was to have been fitted with was removed. This simplification meant that the tank was slightly shorter. Both of these factors reduced the weight, and these savings in weight were reinvested in the tank's frontal protection, with the glacis being thickened and sloped back slightly more. With this part of the FV214 complete, the tank medium gun FV221 Caernarvon project was launched. The aim of this project was to speed up the development of the Conqueror, while giving crews experience in the operation of the vehicle. The FV221 consisted of an FV214 hull mated with a Centurion Mark III turret armed with a 20-pounder gun. With an initial prototype built in April 1952, just 10 of these vehicles were built, the last one in 1953. These had a brief career, nonetheless, seeing extensive trial service in the British Army of the Rhine and the Middle East Land Forces. The Caernarvon Action X fake tank is simply a fictional upgrade of the FV221 Caernarvon medium gun tank. As this vehicle is also equipped with a 20-pounder gun, it also fits the medium gun tank designation. The term medium gun tank is a uniquely British designation. It refers to the size and power of the gun, not the size and weight of the tank. The role of a medium gun tank was to provide support for assaulting infantry by the sheer volume of fire and engaging lighter enemy armored vehicles. The role of engaging heavily armored vehicles and defensive positions fell to the heavy gun tank, such as the Conqueror. Despite the countless falsehoods present on this vehicle, the Caernarvon AX does share some accurate parts of its design with the real FV221. These include the 4-man crew, Horstman Suspension system, and the layout of the hull. The Action X turret is where this mutated tank gets its name. In its own right, the history of this turret is a comedy of errors, but nonetheless, it must be clearly stated that the turret by itself was a real project. Unfortunately, the history of this turret is long lost, leading historians to piece together its history from fragments of files. The following information has been compiled by amateur military historians and Tank Encyclopedia members Ed Francis and Adam Pauli. The first falsehood to tackle is the name Action 10. The official name of this turret was the Centurion Mantletless Turret, so called because it was a design for a new turret for the Centurion. The name Action 10 appeared in a book published in the early 2000s, after the author cited seeing the name written on the back of a photo of the turret. What he fails to mention is that this was written in the 1980s and does not appear in any official material. Evidence suggests that the turret was developed alongside the Centurion and Chieftain, as a means of creating a method for poorer countries to upgrade their Centurion fleets if they could not afford to invest in the Chieftain. Despite popular belief, its development had nothing to do with the FV214 project. The design was quite different from the standard Centurion design. Where the standard Centurion turret had a large mantlet that covered the majority of the turret face, this design was mantletless. A large sloped forehead replaced the mantlet, with the coaxial machine gun being moved to the top left corner. The rest of the turret remained rather similar to the standard turret. The bustle stayed the same basic shape, the commander's turret remained at the back right, while the loader's hatch was on the back left. Unfortunately, the real armor values are currently unknown. In-game they are listed as 254mm on the front, 152.4mm on the sides, and 95.3mm on the rear. Other than the fact that just 3 of these turrets were made, with 2 of them fitted and tested on Centurion chassis and 1 destroyed in a firing trial, little more official information remains on the project. One of these 3 originals still survives and currently sits in the car park of the Tank Museum, Bovington, England. Second to the name, the next error is the fact that this turret was never intended to be installed on any member of the FV200 series of vehicles. For one thing, this turret was developed almost a full decade after the FV221 Caernarvon. Another issue is the insertion of additional armor on the turret cheeks. The designs of these has been taken straight from another World of Tanks fake, the Super Conqueror. No such name was ever used. The tank was, in fact, a mere static test vehicle, a guinea pig that was pummeled by high-explosive anti-tank and high-explosive squash-head ammunition to test their effects on armored vehicles. For this, the vehicle was covered with additional 14 to 30mm armor plates over its bow and turret cheeks. There was never any intention, or even a need, to place these plates on the mantletless turret. In the World of Tanks game, a single Browning M1919A4 30 caliber machine gun was also added to the commander's cupola on the turret roof. This was known as the L3A1 in British service. The Caernarvon Action 10 is not the only vehicle in World of Tanks to use the false name. The other vehicle is the Centurion Action 10, which is based on the Centurions which were tested with the mantletless turret. The armament installed on this spurious vehicle is the Ordnance quick-firing 20-pounder gun with Type B barrel. There were 2 types of 20-pounder, the Type A without a fume extractor, and the Type B with a fume extractor. The gun is, at least, an accurate choice, as the mantletless turret was tested with both the 20-pounder and the L7 105mm gun. The 20-pounder was the successor of the 17-pounder gun of the Second World War, and had an 84mm bore. A range of ammunition was available to it. When firing an armor-piercing discarding sabot round at a muzzle velocity of 1,465 meters per second, the gun could penetrate up to 330mm of armor at 914 meters. In-game, maximum penetration is listed as just 258mm. Despite the accurate selection of a gun, there remains an error in the presentation of it, in that there is a thermal sleeve around the barrel. Thermal sleeves are used to provide consistent temperature to the barrel, in turn preventing distortions due to thermal expansion caused by the temperature fluctuations around the tube. There were no such sleeves added to the barrels of the 20-pounder gun or the 105mm until the 1960s. The 20-pounder gun, both A and B types, was installed on multiple vehicles. It served on the Centurion from the Mark III to the Mark V-2, after which it was replaced by the 105mm L7. It was also the main armament of the FV214 Charioteer medium gun tank, and of course the real FV221 Caernarvon. As with the equally fake FV215B, the Caernarvon AX is equipped with the Rolls-Royce Griffon. This is in reality an aircraft engine. While Rolls-Royce aero engines have been adapted for use in armored vehicles, there is no evidence at all to suggest that there was ever a plan to make an AFV variant of the Griffon. An example of a converted Rolls-Royce aero engine is the Meteor, as used in the real FV221 Caernarvon. This was an adaptation of the Merlin, an engine famous for powering the British Spitfire and American Mustang fighter aircraft of World War II. The Griffon was a 37-litre 60-degree V12 liquid-cooled engine. It was the last V12 aero engine built by Rolls-Royce, with production ceasing in 1955. It was used on such aircraft as the Fairey Firefly, Supermarine Spitfire, and Hawker Sea Fury. The engine produced over 2,000 horsepower in its plain configuration, but in-game it is listed as producing just 950 horsepower. This is not too far-fetched, as converted aero engines were often derated for use in armored vehicles. Meteor is an example of this. As the Merlin, it produced up to 1,500 horsepower depending on the model. When derated as the Meteor, it produced just 810 horsepower. On the real FV221, the Rolls-Royce Meteor M120 No. 2 Mark I produced 810 horsepower and propelled the vehicle to a top speed of 35 km per hour. In this fake tank, the engine is listed as propelling this vehicle to a top speed of 36.3 km per hour. The Horstman Suspension of the Caernarvon Action X is one of the accurate parts of this vehicle. On the FV200s, the suspension system had 2 wheels per bogie unit. The wheels were made of steel, measuring approximately 50 cm in diameter, and constructed from 3 separate parts. These consisted of an outer and inner half, with the steel rim in contact with the track. Between each layer there was a rubber ring. The Horstman suspension consisted of 3 horizontal springs mounted concentrically, guided by an internal rod and tube. This allowed each wheel to rise and fall independently, although the system did struggle if both wheels rose at the same time. 4 bogies lined each side of the hull of the vehicle, giving it 8 road wheels per side. There would also be 4 return rollers, 1 per bogie. The drive sprockets were relocated at the rear of the running gear, with the idler front. The drive sprockets were located at the rear of the running gear, with the idler wheel at the front. The Caernarvon Action X is just one of a litany of convenient or lazy fakes by Wargaming. Not only do they erroneously mate a turret with a hull that was never intended to carry it, they also use a completely false designation for said turret. To cap it all, they then adorn the turret with false additions, such as the armor plate. Had this tank existed, it would have been completely redundant. The turret itself was not developed until the 1960s, after the Caernarvons had all been retired or turned into Conquerors. By this time, the FV214 Chieftain was in development, and the Conqueror was about to leave service, showing just how obsolete the chassis was, not to mention the 20-pounder gun.